My girlfriend was flirting with other guys, and she called me her backup plan. Strange to hear that from someone who still goes to school. Jessica and I met at a mutual friend's party. She was the kind of woman who turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Beautiful, confident, and seemingly out of my league. At 35, I'd had my fair share of relationships, but none of them ever felt quite right. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed perfect. From the moment we started talking, I was hooked. We started dating soon after, and for the first year, everything was bliss. Jessica was fun, adventurous, and charming. I'd never met someone who could make me feel as alive as she did. But, I won't lie, there were early signs of trouble. Jessica thrived on attention, whether it was from me, her friends, or strangers. I told myself it was harmless. After all, she was a social butterfly, and that was part of what made her so captivating. After a year of dating, she moved into my house. I'd bought it when I turned 30, a spacious, modern home in a nice neighborhood. It was my pride and joy, something I'd worked my ass off to afford. I'd grown up in a family that struggled financially, so being able to own a home like that was a big deal to me. Jessica, of course, loved it. She said it felt like a fairy tale living there. I paid all the bills, covered her car insurance, which was ridiculously expensive because of her driving record, and even helped fund her return to school. She'd always dreamed of becoming a graphic designer, and I wanted to support her dreams. For a while, it felt like we were building a life together. But looking back, I was the one doing the building. Jessica didn't work, and I never pushed her to. She said she wanted to focus on school, and I was okay with that. I figured I could handle the financial burden for a while. After all, I was making decent money at my job, and it wasn't like I couldn't afford it. Besides, I liked being the provider. It made me feel good to take care of her. But over time, little things started to bother me. Jessica had expensive tastes, designer clothes, fancy dinners, lavish vacations. At first, I indulged her. I wanted her to be happy. But as the months turned into years, I started to feel like I was being taken for granted. She never offered to contribute financially, not even for small things like groceries. And whenever I brought it up, she'd get defensive. "You make more than enough money," she'd say. "Why are you acting like it's such a big deal?" Then there was the matter of her social life. Jessica loved going out, parties, dinners, weekend trips with her friends. I wasn't opposed to her having a good time, but it seemed like she was always on the go. And more often than not, I wasn't invited. "It's just a girls' night," she'd say, or "you wouldn't enjoy it anyway." I told myself I was overthinking it. She was entitled to her independence, and I didn't want to be the controlling boyfriend. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The first real red flag came about 2 years into our relationship. Jessica had been acting distant for weeks, texting less, spending more time out with her friends, and being generally dismissive when I tried to talk to her about it. One night, I decided to surprise her by cooking dinner. I spent hours preparing her favorite meal, hoping it would help us reconnect. But when she came home and saw the effort I'd put in, she barely reacted. "That's sweet," she said flatly, before heading upstairs to take a phone call. I sat at the dining table alone that night, eating the dinner I'd made for us. A few weeks later, I found out why she'd been so distant. I was tidying up the house while she was out when her phone buzzed on the counter. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the screen lit up with a message that caught my attention. It was from a guy named Kyle, and it wasn't exactly platonic. My heart sank as I read the text's flirty messages, inside jokes, and even plans to meet up. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. When Jessica got home that night, I confronted her. At first, she denied everything, but when I showed her the messages, she broke down. She swore it was just harmless flirting and that nothing physical had happened. "I'm sorry," she said through tears. "I was just feeling lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I guess I was looking for attention." Against my better judgment, I forgave her. I told myself that relationships weren't always easy and that people made mistakes. But a part of me couldn't let it go. Things improved for a while after that. Jessica seemed genuinely remorseful, and we started spending more time together. But the cracks in our relationship were still there, and over time, they only got bigger. Jessica's spending habits became even more excessive. She insisted on upgrading her car to a brand new luxury SUV, which I ended up paying for. She also decided to drop out of school, saying it wasn't for her. When I asked her what she wanted to do instead, she shrugged and said she'd figure it out. By the time we hit the 4-year mark, I was exhausted. I felt like I was pouring everything I had into the relationship while Jessica was giving the bare minimum. But despite all the issues, I still loved her. Or at least, I loved the idea of her, the woman I thought she was when we first met. Jessica and I were inseparable during the first year and a half. It felt like we were living in a dream. We traveled to exotic locations, planned spontaneous weekend getaways, and spent countless evenings cuddled up on the couch, binge-watching shows we both loved. Every moment with her felt like magic, and I honestly believed I'd hit the jackpot with her. My friends would constantly comment on how perfect we looked together, and even strangers would sometimes stop us to say how lucky I was. And at least that's what I thought. The first major trip we took was to Greece. I'd always wanted to visit Santorini, and Jessica was thrilled at the idea of a romantic vacation on a beautiful island. I spared no expense: luxury hotels, private tours, five-star dinners overlooking the ocean. Jessica glowed the entire time, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to be able to give her these experiences. She'd lean into me, whispering how much she loved me, how she'd never been treated so well. I drank up her words like they were gospel. Our weekends back home were just as magical. Whether we were hiking, trying out new restaurants, or just relaxing at home, we seemed to have an unbreakable connection. Jessica had this way of making everything feel exciting, even the mundane. She'd pull me into her world of spontaneity, convincing me to drive hours to see a band she liked or to explore a random small town just because she thought it looked cute. I loved her free spirit and how she brought out a side of me I didn't even know existed. But then, things started to change. It wasn't sudden, but rather a gradual shift that I didn't fully notice until it was too late. At first, it was small things: Jessica spending more time on her phone, or suddenly canceling plans because she wasn't feeling well. I brushed it off, convincing myself that everyone needed their space and downtime. But over the weeks, her behavior became harder to ignore. She started leaving the house without telling me where she was going. At first, I didn't think much of it. She'd casually mention that she was meeting up with friends or running errands, but she'd be gone for hours. Sometimes, she wouldn't come back until late at night. When I asked her about it, she'd shrug it off, saying she just lost track of time. I didn't want to come off as controlling, so I didn't push. But the unease in my gut was growing. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise her with a nice dinner. I spent hours preparing everything: her favorite dishes, candles, wine, the works. She'd left earlier in the afternoon, saying she was meeting her friend Megan for coffee. When the hours ticked by and she still hadn't come home, I started to worry. I texted her a few times, asking if everything was okay. No response. Finally, around midnight, she walked in, looking disheveled and irritated. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "With Megan," she said curtly, tossing her bag onto the couch. "For 8 hours?" I pressed, feeling my patience slipping. "I don't need to explain my every move to you," she snapped. "Why are you being so clingy all of a sudden?" Her words stung. I wasn't trying to be clingy. I just wanted to know why she'd been gone for so long without even a text. But instead of arguing, I backed down. Jessica had a way of turning every confrontation into an accusation against me, and I hated the feeling of being the bad guy. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Jessica's absences became more frequent, and she became increasingly secretive. I'd wake up to find her gone, her side of the bed cold. When I asked her where she'd been, she'd give vague answers: out with friends, or I needed some fresh air. She also started ignoring my texts more often, sometimes taking hours to respond, if she responded at all. It felt like she was slipping away from me, and I had no idea how to stop it. One night, I decided to talk to Megan, the friend Jessica always claimed to be with. Megan and I had met a few times, and she seemed nice enough. I casually brought up Jessica's frequent hangouts with her, hoping to get some reassurance that everything was normal. But Megan's confused expression told me otherwise. "Hangouts?" she asked. "What hangouts?" "You know, all those times Jessica says she's meeting up with you," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Megan frowned. "I mean, we've grabbed coffee a couple of times, but it's been weeks since I last saw her." My stomach dropped. I thanked Megan and left, my mind racing. If Jessica wasn't with Megan, then where was she? And more importantly, why was she lying to me? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction we'd had over the past few months, trying to piece together the puzzle. I thought about the times she'd come home late, the mysterious phone calls she'd take in another room, and the way she'd become so distant and cold. It all pointed to one possibility, one I didn't want to believe. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I waited until she came downstairs, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess. She barely acknowledged me as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "Jessica, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. She sighed, clearly annoyed. "What now?" Where have you been going? I asked. And don't tell me it's with Megan, because I talked to her. She said she hasn't seen you in weeks. Jessica froze for a moment, her eyes narrowing. Then she laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. Wow, you're actually spying on me now. That's pathetic, she said, shaking her head. I'm not spying on you. I shot back. I just want the truth. Why are you lying to me? She set her coffee down and crossed her arms, glaring at me. Maybe because you're suffocating me. Maybe because I can't breathe in this relationship anymore. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done for her, everything we'd been through together, she was blaming me for her dishonesty? Jessica stormed out of the house that morning, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea where she was going, and for the first time, I didn't care. All I knew was that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I loved, was slipping further and further away. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. Things between Jessica and me were unraveling fast, and I could feel the weight of it crushing me more with each passing day. I tried to reach out to her, to have a serious conversation about what was happening to us. I needed answers. Why she was pulling away, why she seemed so angry with me all the time, and most importantly, if there was any way to fix it. But every time I brought it up, Jessica shut me down. You're being too dramatic, she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand, as if my concerns were nothing more than trivial annoyances. It was maddening. I'd sit her down, try to calmly explain how her behavior was affecting me, and she'd roll her eyes like I was the most boring man alive. The love and affection that once defined our relationship had been replaced with cold indifference, and I couldn't understand why. One evening, I came home from work to find Jessica sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I set my bag down and sat beside her, trying to catch her attention. Jessica, can we talk? I asked, my voice steady but pleading. About what? She said without looking up. About us. About how things have been lately. She sighed heavily and finally put her phone down, but her expression was one of irritation, not concern. What's there to talk about? You're overthinking everything as usual. Her words stung, but I pressed on. I'm not overthinking. You've been distant, Jessica. You're never home, you don't answer my texts, and when I try to talk to you, you act like I'm annoying you. I just want to know what's going on. Jessica leaned back on the couch and crossed her arms. What's going on is that you're suffocating me. You're always asking where I've been, who I'm with, what I'm doing. It's too much. I wouldn't have to ask if you didn't keep everything a secret. I shot back, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. Do you even care about this relationship anymore? She scoffed. Of course I care, but I'm not going to let you control me. Control her? That wasn't what I was doing at all. I was desperate to salvage what we had, to understand why things had gone so wrong. But to Jessica, my efforts to communicate were nothing more than an attempt to dominate her. It was infuriating and heartbreaking all at once. The breaking point came a few nights later. We were sitting in the kitchen after dinner. Well, I was sitting. Jessica was leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone like she always did. I'd been trying to think of the right way to broach the subject again, but before I could, Jessica spoke. You know, she said casually, not even looking up from her phone. You're really easily replaceable. I froze. What? Jessica finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. I mean, it's not like you're the only guy in the world. I have dozens of men who would kill to be with me. Her words were like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why would you say something like that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica shrugged. I'm just being honest. You're acting like I owe you something, like I'm lucky to have you. But the truth is, you're the lucky one. And if you don't stop acting so needy, I might just remind you of that. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. For years, I'd done everything I could to make Jessica happy. I'd supported her financially, emotionally, and in every other way I could think of. And this was how she saw me, as someone who could be replaced at a moment's notice. I can't believe you'd say something so cruel, I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding in my chest. After everything I've done for you, this is how you feel? Jessica rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go again, playing the martyr. You act like you're some saint for paying the bills and buying me things. Newsflash, that's what you're supposed to do in a relationship. I'm supposed to be treated with respect. I shot back. I'm supposed to feel like my partner actually values me. She laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. Maybe if you acted like a man instead of a whiny little boy, I'd respect you more. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there anymore. My mind was racing, replaying every hurtful thing Jessica had said. How had we gone from being so happy to this? How had I missed the warning signs? And why, despite everything, did I still feel like I couldn't let her go? I ended up at a bar a few miles from home. It wasn't a place I usually went to, but it felt like the right spot to drown my sorrows. I ordered a drink and sat in a corner booth, staring at the amber liquid in my glass. My thoughts were a mess, a chaotic swirl of anger, sadness, and confusion. A man at the bar noticed me and came over, introducing himself as Aaron. He looked to be around my age, with a kind face and a warm demeanor. "Rough night?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me. "You have no idea," I said, laughing bitterly. Aaron listened as I spilled my story, from the early days of my relationship with Jessica to the cruel things she'd said that night. He didn't interrupt or judge, just nodded and offered the occasional word of encouragement. By the time I finished, I felt a little lighter, though the pain was still there. "She sounds toxic," Aaron said bluntly. "I don't know why you're putting up with her." I shrugged. "Because I love her, I guess. Or at least I used to." Aaron leaned forward, his expression serious. "Love isn't supposed to feel like this. It's not supposed to make you feel small or unworthy. If she can't see your value, then maybe it's time to walk away." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so caught up in trying to fix things with Jessica that I hadn't stopped to consider whether she was even worth fixing things for. But as much as I wanted to believe Aaron was right, I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I thanked Aaron for listening and left the bar, my mind still racing. When I got home, Jessica was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her for a moment. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. Nothing like the woman who'd torn me apart just hours earlier. I wanted to believe that the Jessica I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The doubts and resentment were eating me alive, but I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I just hoped that when the time came, I'd be strong enough to make the right choice. I didn't think things could get worse between Jessica and me. The fights, the cold indifference, the way she dismissed me like I was a burden in her life. It all felt unbearable. But deep down, I still clung to some sliver of hope that we could fix things. That was before Amanda came into the picture. Amanda was one of Jessica's closest friends, though I'd only met her a handful of times. She was the opposite of Jessica in many ways, quiet, reserved, and seemingly kind. I always got the impression that Amanda didn't fully approve of Jessica's behavior, but she never said anything outright. That all changed one rainy Thursday afternoon. I was at home, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when Amanda's name popped up. I was surprised. She'd never texted me before. The message was simple: "We need to talk." "It's about Jessica." My stomach twisted into a knot as I stared at the screen. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be good. I agreed to meet Amanda at a nearby coffee shop. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. She looked up as I approached, her face a mixture of guilt and determination. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "What's this about, Amanda?" I asked, my voice tinged with unease. She hesitated, glancing around the room as if to make sure no one was listening. Then she leaned forward and said the words that would shatter whatever hope I had left. "Jessica's been seeing other men." The air left my lungs. "What?" "I didn't want to get involved," Amanda said quickly, her voice trembling. "But I can't keep watching her treat you like this. You deserve to know the truth." I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. "How long has this been going on?" "A while," she admitted. "I don't know exactly how many, but you're not the only one, Liam. She's been seeing other guys for months, and she doesn't even try to hide it around her friends. She calls you her backup plan." Her words hit me like a freight train. Backup plan. Was that all I was to Jessica? A safety net, someone to fall back on while she lived out some fantasy life with other men? I felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve better," Amanda said firmly. "I know we don't know each other well, but I couldn't keep quiet anymore. You need to see the truth for yourself." I left the coffee shop in a daze, Amanda's words echoing in my mind. I didn't want to believe her, but deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. Jessica's behavior over the past year suddenly made sense. The secrecy, the late nights, the coldness. I'd been blind, too caught up in trying to fix things to see what was right in front of me. I decided I needed proof. If Jessica was really seeing other men, I had to see it with my own eyes. That evening, I called in sick to work and waited until Jessica left the house. She said she was meeting Megan for dinner, but after what Amanda had told me, I wasn't buying it. I followed her. I know how that sounds, and believe me, I hated myself for stooping to that level, but I had to know the truth. I kept my distance, driving a few cars behind her, my heart pounding with every turn. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant, the kind of place we used to go to when things were good between us. I parked across the street and watched as she walked inside, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, looking radiant and carefree. I waited a few minutes before heading inside. The hostess gave me a suspicious look as I walked past the podium without checking in, but I didn't care. My eyes scanned the dining room, and that's when I saw her, sitting at a table by the window with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and laughing at something she'd said. Jessica was leaning forward, her hand lightly touching his arm, her smile brighter than I'd seen it in months. My heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. I stood there, frozen, watching the woman I loved flirt with another man like I didn't even exist. They looked like a perfect couple, happy, carefree, completely absorbed in each other. It was like I was watching a version of Jessica I hadn't seen in years, and it broke me. I don't know how long I stood there before the man noticed me. He leaned in and whispered something to Jessica, and she turned to look at me. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of shock and, for a fleeting moment, fear. I couldn't tell if she was more upset about being caught or the fact that I was there at all. I didn't wait for her to say anything. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my legs shaking beneath me. I could hear her calling my name as I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the cool night air. I didn't stop. I got into my car and drove, not even caring where I was going. When I finally pulled over, I realized I was parked at the same bar I'd gone to the night Jessica told me I was replaceable. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. I went inside, ordered a drink, and tried to numb the pain that was threatening to consume me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring into my glass, before my phone buzzed. It was Jessica. She'd called me 5 times and left a flurry of texts, all variations of, "It's not what you think," and "Please come home so we can talk." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I didn't have the strength to hear her excuses or lies. Eventually, I went home. The house was dark, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't there. But as I stepped inside, I saw her sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Liam, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said coldly. "I saw everything." "It's not what you think," she said again, standing up and taking a step toward me. "He's just a friend. We were talking about work." I laughed bitterly. "Do you really think I'm that stupid, Jessica? You've been lying to me for months." "Amanda told me everything." Her face crumbled at the mention of Amanda. "That bitch doesn't know what she's talking about," she spat. "She's jealous of me. She's always been jealous." "Stop," I said, my voice rising. "Just stop. I can't do this anymore, Jessica. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. You don't love me. You never did." Her expression shifted then, from desperation to anger. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth? I'm bored, Liam. You're boring. I need excitement and you're just not enough." Her words were like knives, cutting deeper than anything she'd said before. I felt a wave of anger and sadness crash over me, but I didn't let it show. I just nodded and turned toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "To pack," I said without looking back. "I'm done." Jessica didn't follow me. She didn't try to stop me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally doing the right thing. After the confrontation with Jessica, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a void. I'd given everything to that relationship, my time, my energy, my heart, and not to mention, my money, and it had all been thrown back in my face. For years, I'd convinced myself that the cracks in our relationship could be fixed, that if I just worked harder or gave more, we could get back to the way things were in the beginning. But that night at the restaurant had destroyed any illusions I had left. The next morning, I made my decision. I wasn't going to live like this anymore. I couldn't keep being Jessica's doormat, her backup plan, the guy she leaned on while she explored other options. It was over, and I needed to take control of my life again. The first step was cutting off the financial support. Jessica wasn't home when I sat down at my computer to go through the expenses. I started with the big ones, her car insurance, which I'd been paying faithfully every month to the tune of $400, and the credit card I'd opened in my name but allowed her to use. I logged in and saw a string of charges that made my stomach turn. Designer clothes, spa treatments, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. I canceled the card immediately. She could figure out how to pay for her lifestyle on her own. Next, I called the insurance company and removed her from my policy. The representative on the phone asked if I wanted to add anyone else to replace her, and I couldn't help but laugh. No, I said firmly, just me. By the time Jessica came home that afternoon, I was ready to have the conversation I'd been dreading for years. She walked through the door with her usual air of indifference, dropping her bag on the couch and kicking off her shoes without so much as a hello. I stood in the kitchen, waiting for her to notice me. When she finally looked up, her expression shifted, as if she could sense something was different. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. She rolled her eyes and sighed. Oh, great. What now? I'm done, Jessica, I said. I'm done paying your bills, done covering your expenses, done pretending this relationship is anything but a one-way street. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. What are you talking about? I canceled the credit card, I continued, and your car insurance. You're on your own now, and I need you to move out. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. For a second, Jessica just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, to my astonishment, she started to cry. Liam, please, she said, her voice trembling. Don't do this. We can work things out. I'll change, I promise. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but I'd heard it all before. Every time I confronted her about her behavior, she'd cry and make promises she never kept. I wasn't going to fall for it again. It's too late, Jessica, I said. You've been lying to me for years. You've been using me. I can't do this anymore. She stepped closer to me, her tears streaming down her face. I love you, she said desperately. I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. Please don't give up on us. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I dreamed of hearing her say those words, to finally feel like she cared about me as much as I cared about her. But now, they felt hollow. If she loved me, she wouldn't have treated me the way she did. She wouldn't have lied to me, cheated on me, and humiliated me. I can't do this, I said again, stepping back. You need to leave. Jessica broke down completely, collapsing onto the couch in a sobbing mess. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, I hated seeing her like this. But I reminded myself that her tears didn't erase the pain she'd caused me. They didn't change the fact that she'd betrayed me over and over again. Over the next few days, Jessica's behavior swung wildly between begging me to take her back and lashing out at me in anger. One minute, she'd be pleading with me to give her another chance, promising to change and be the girlfriend I deserved. The next, she'd be yelling at me, calling me selfish and ungrateful for everything she'd supposedly done for me. You're going to regret this, she said one night as she packed her things. You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you. I didn't respond. There was no point. Jessica's version of reality was so warped, so disconnected from the truth, that trying to reason with her was a waste of time. When she finally left, the house felt eerily quiet. For the first time in years, I was alone, and it was both liberating and terrifying. I walked through the empty rooms, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and hope. I'd lost so much in that relationship, but I'd also gained something invaluable: clarity. I finally saw Jessica for who she really was, and I knew I deserved better. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild my life. I reconnected with friends I drifted away from during my time with Jessica, threw myself into work, and even started going to therapy to work through the emotional wreckage she'd left behind. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, and I'd find myself missing the good times we'd shared. But I reminded myself that those good times were just a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that hid the truth of who Jessica really was. One day, I ran into Amanda at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me but quickly smiled and asked how I was doing. I told her the truth, that things were hard but getting better. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'm glad you got out, she said. You deserve so much better, Liam. Don't forget that. Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd let Jessica's treatment of me define my worth. But now, I was finally starting to see that I was more than just a backup plan, more than someone's safety net. I was enough, all on my own. After Jessica moved out, I thought I could finally start to rebuild my life in peace. The house was quiet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. But if I thought Jessica was going to fade quietly into the background, I was sorely mistaken. What followed were some of the most exhausting and surreal weeks of my life. It started with whispers. At first, it was subtle, an awkward encounter with a mutual acquaintance, a strange look from a coworker. Then came the direct questions. "Hey, Liam, I heard something and I just wanted to check with you," my coworker Sarah said one afternoon. She looked nervous, almost embarrassed. "Did you and Jessica break up because you were controlling?" I nearly dropped the stack of papers I was holding. "What?" I asked, completely caught off guard. "She's been saying you were, emotionally abusive," Sarah said hesitantly. I didn't believe it, but people are talking. I felt my blood run cold. Jessica and I had plenty of issues, but if there was one thing I could say with absolute certainty, it was that I was never controlling or abusive. I'd bent over backward to make her happy, to accommodate her needs and wants, often at the expense of my own. To hear that she was painting me as some kind of monster was infuriating. Over the next few days, the rumors spread like wildfire. People I barely knew were coming up to me, offering sympathetic smiles or awkward condolences, as if they believed every word Jessica was saying. It didn't take long for the full extent of her accusations to reach me. According to Jessica, I had been emotionally controlling, obsessive, and manipulative. She claimed I monitored her every move, demanded to know where she was at all times, and isolated her from her friends. It was all lies, of course, but the damage was already done. Jessica was charismatic and had a talent for spinning stories in her favor. People wanted to believe her, and I was left scrambling to defend myself against accusations I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. Things escalated when Amanda reached out to me again. She called one evening, her voice tense. "Liam, I think you should know. Jessica's been saying you threatened her," she said. "What?" I asked, my jaw dropping. "That's ridiculous. I never threatened her." "I know that," Amanda said quickly, "but she's been telling people you got aggressive when she tried to leave. She's saying she's scared of you." I was stunned. Jessica was creating an entirely fictional narrative, one that painted her as the victim and me as some kind of villain. It was like a bad movie, except it was my life. I thanked Amanda for letting me know and hung up, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. If I confronted Jessica, it would only fuel her lies. If I ignored her, people might take her silence as proof that her stories were true. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Jessica threw another bombshell at me. She called me out of the blue one afternoon, her tone uncharacteristically soft. "Liam, I need to talk to you," she said. "It's important." I considered hanging up. After everything she'd done, I didn't owe her anything. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop. When I arrived, Jessica was already there, looking disheveled but smug, like she knew something I didn't. She didn't waste any time. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her eyes locking onto mine. The words hit me like a truck. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "What?" I finally managed to say. "You heard me," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm pregnant, and it's yours." My mind was spinning. This couldn't be happening. Jessica and I hadn't been together in weeks, and our sex life in the months leading up to the breakup had been almost non-existent. Something about her claim didn't add up. "Jessica, are you sure?" I asked cautiously. "I mean, have you seen a doctor? Do you have proof?" Her face hardened. "You don't believe me?" "It's not that," I said quickly, though in truth, I didn't believe her. "I just think we should make sure. This is a big deal." Jessica's demeanor shifted, her voice rising. "You think I'm lying? You think I'd make something like this up?" "I didn't say that," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But if you're pregnant, we need to handle this responsibly. That means getting a doctor involved, making sure everything's okay." Jessica glared at me, her face flushing with anger. "You're unbelievable, Liam. I'm giving you the chance to be a father, and you're acting like I'm some kind of liar." The conversation went in circles for nearly an hour, with Jessica alternating between tears and rage. She insisted she was pregnant, but every time I asked for proof, she deflected. Finally, I told her I wouldn't discuss the matter further until she provided medical confirmation. She stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there, exhausted and bewildered. Over the next few days, Jessica sent me a barrage of texts, all accusing me of being a deadbeat, a coward, and a terrible person. She claimed she'd been to the doctor and had proof of the pregnancy, But when I asked to see it, she conveniently forgot to bring it. My doubts grew stronger with every interaction, but I couldn't shake the tiny sliver of fear that she might be telling the truth. What if she really was pregnant? What if I was about to become a father? Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reached out to Amanda, who had been my only ally throughout this nightmare. I explained the situation, and to my surprise, she wasn't shocked. "Liam, I don't think she's pregnant," Amanda said bluntly. "She's been telling people different stories. First that she's a few weeks along, then that she's nearly 3 months. None of it makes sense." Her words were a relief, but I needed confirmation. I called Jessica and told her I wanted to accompany her to her next doctor's appointment. To my surprise, she agreed. The day of the appointment, I showed up at the clinic, half expecting Jessica not to show. Sure enough, she was nowhere to be found. I waited for over an hour before calling her. She didn't answer. Later, she texted me a string of excuses, claiming she'd been caught up at work and couldn't make it. At that point, I knew the truth. Jessica wasn't pregnant. She'd made the whole thing up in a desperate attempt to manipulate me into staying with her. The realization was equal parts infuriating and heartbreaking. I couldn't believe she'd stooped so low, but I also felt a strange sense of closure. Jessica had shown me exactly who she was, and I finally had the strength to walk away for good. I blocked her number that night and began the process of cutting her out of my life entirely. It wasn't easy. Her rumors and lies had done a lot of damage, and it took months to repair my reputation. But in the end, I came out stronger. Jessica's manipulation might have broken me once, but it would never break me again. After everything that happened with Jessica, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to trust someone again. The lies, the manipulation, the rumors, those things don't just roll off your back. They sink in and make you question yourself and everyone around you. For a while, I avoided relationships altogether. I needed time to heal, to rebuild myself from the ground up. It was a slow process, but eventually, I began to feel like myself again. That's when I met Lauren. Lauren was nothing like Jessica. We met through mutual friends at a small dinner party. She wasn't the loudest or the flashiest person in the room, but there was something about her that drew me in. She had a quiet confidence, a warmth that made you feel like you could tell her anything. When we started talking, it felt easy, natural in a way I hadn't experienced in years. At first, I was hesitant. I'd been burned so badly by Jessica that the idea of letting someone new into my life was terrifying. But Lauren had a way of putting me at ease. She didn't push or rush me. She was patient, understanding, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. Over time, I began to let my guard down. Our first date was simple but perfect. We went to a local park and spent hours walking and talking. Lauren asked me about my life, my interests, my dreams. She didn't seem to care about material things or status. She just wanted to know who I was. It was refreshing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Lauren was attentive in ways I hadn't even realized I needed. She remembered the little things I told her, like my favorite coffee order or the song that always put me in a good mood. She'd text me good luck before big meetings and check in afterward to see how they went. She made me feel cared for in a way I hadn't felt in years. And it wasn't just that she was kind. She was also supportive. When I told her about the mess with Jessica, she listened without judgment. She didn't try to fix things or tell me how to feel. She just listened, and that was exactly what I needed. As things between Lauren and me progressed, I couldn't help but reflect on how different my life was now. Being with her felt effortless, like we were a team working toward the same goals. She had her own life, her own career, her own friends, and she never made me feel like I was responsible for her happiness. She was independent, but she also made it clear that she wanted me in her life. It was a balance I hadn't known was possible. Meanwhile, Jessica's life was taking a very different turn. I hadn't heard from her directly since the pregnancy lie, but word of her situation had made its way back to me through mutual acquaintances. Without my financial support, Jessica's lavish lifestyle quickly fell apart. The designer clothes, the spa days, the fancy dinners, all of it was gone. She couldn't keep up with the bills on her own, and when she turned to her parents for help, they refused. Apparently, they were tired of bailing her out and told her it was time to grow up. Without her parents' help, Jessica was forced to drop out of school. She'd been coasting for years, barely putting in any effort, and now she didn't even have the means to pretend she was working toward something. The house of cards she built for herself had come crashing down, and from what I heard, she was struggling to pick up the pieces. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little satisfaction at first. After everything she'd put me through, it was hard not to feel like her downfall was karma catching up with her. But as time went on, I realized that holding onto those feelings wasn't helping me. Jessica was no longer a part of my life, and I didn't want her to occupy space in my mind any longer. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I had my own life to focus on, and that life was looking better than ever. Lauren and I started spending more and more time together. She introduced me to her friends, who were just as kind and down-to-earth as she was. We went on trips, tried new restaurants, and even started taking a pottery class together, a hobby neither of us was particularly good at but both enjoyed anyway. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in a relationship where both people were equally invested.